conversation here. Let's get that tie right. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Right? We always want it to be a big conversation here. I'm actually going to rearrange the camera a little bit. So I did my work for today, and then I went to the gym and exercised, and then I ran back here to have a nice chat with all of you. So I'm here, and I have a whole bunch of unnamed water beverage. I have a whole bunch of unnamed diet beverage. You know, you gotta open it up. They say it sounds like cocking a gun, so here it goes. Right? And pouring the unnamed diet beverage. We're gonna have a conversation, so be sure to, you know, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I always like to work out this time of year because working out, you know, allergies are intense. So going to the gym and exercising, actually, for some reason, it lessens the effects of allergies. So, you know, if I can work up a sweat, you know, on the elliptical machine a little bit, then come back, my goodness, my ability to breathe is greatly enhanced. So it was great I got to go work out a little bit. I'm glad to be here with all of you. You all are very, very, very special to me, I must say. You all are very, very special to me. We're going to have a conversation, and the way we do things here, for those who may not be familiar, for folks that are new, is that first you hit the like button, then you hit the subscribe button, and then you hit the notifications bell. Then, after you've done that, I give my opening remarks, and then after I give my opening remarks, I do the roll call, where I call you out as we see you, and we find out who the audience is, names and locations. That's really beautiful. That's really amazing. It's always great to find out how big our audience is, how international our audience is. Amazing. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions. So that's a big part of our show here is you send me a super chat, I send you an answer. I give you an answer, rather. So that's how we do things. That's how we're gonna roll. Quick announcement, for those who may not be aware, you can support this program and the efforts that we do here on this YouTube channel. You can support those efforts by becoming a member on Patreon. And this Thursday, I'm going to stream for Patreon members or patrons only. So if you want to be part of the Thursday patrons only stream, all you have to do is sign up right down there. The link is down below. That should be awesome. So yeah, like I said, I answer your super chat questions in the second half of the show. So if you have a question, I will give you an answer. If you send a super chat, I will give you an answer. It may not be the answer that you want, but it will be an answer. That's how we roll. Yeah, and this is good stuff. Here I am. I'm sitting here with my unnamed diet beverage and my unnamed water beverage. It is lovely. I'm sitting here at my office in Manhattan. It is beautiful outside. Do I dare show you the New York City skyline out there? Isn't that sexy? Isn't that nice? Wow, look at that. Look at that. Those are real New York City buildings over there. Wow, wow, wow. We're in a conference room. I'm sitting here. Behind me is that totally real painting that never possibly has the light go off and doesn't possibly change the channel. Wink, wink. And yeah, we just do our thing here. So it's a lovely afternoon. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a little spring allergies, but I've got plenty of liquids, I guess. And so let's get right into it, shall we? Opening remarks first, then roll call, then I answer your super chat questions. So here we go. Opening remarks. I just wanted to comment quickly. Folks, I don't know if you've been aware, it doesn't get very much press here in the United States. It's a big story in Europe, very big story in Europe. It's not getting a lot of attention here, but it's really important, actually, if you want to understand the way international media works. There was an explosion at an ammunition facility in the Czech Republic, formerly Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic. There was an explosion at that facility back in 2014. It blew up, and people died. It was pretty awful. Now, U.S. media and international media blamed that explosion on Russia. They said that Russia was responsible for it, that Russia had blown up this ammunition facility, They sat there and they said, gosh darn, those Russians did it again. Mwahaha. You know, those evil Russians sat there and said, ah ha ha, we're going to blow up this ammo facility in the Czech Republic because we're rotten, evil Russians and we do rotten, evil Russian things. Mwahaha. That was how U.S. media portrayed it, right? That Russia blew up. You know, why would they do such a thing? I don't know. What justification or motivation did they have for doing this? Nope, but it was treated as absolute fact that this 2014 explosion that happened at a chemical ammunition facility in Russia, or I'm sorry, a chemical ammunition facility in the Czech Republic, it was Russia who did it. And if you didn't agree with that, you were a crazy conspiracy theorist, right? Because everybody knows that Russia blew up the ammunition factory in the Czech Republic. I mean, it was treated, you know, if you don't believe that, oh boy. So you don't think Russia blew up the Czech ammo facility? Well, I guess, you know, did the Holocaust not happen? Did the moon landing never happen? Because clearly everybody knows. I mean, it's on BBC, it's on MSNBC, it's on CNN, so clearly it must be true. And if you didn't, you know, the Russians said, yeah, we didn't blow up this facility. What's going on here? But everybody knew, right? And you were just a crazy wingnut if you didn't believe it. Well, now we know that the president of the Czech Republic has come out and said, yeah, we don't really have any evidence that Russia blew up this facility. The president of the Czech Republic, you know, not some blogger in the Czech Republic, not some Russian activist group, but the president of the Czech Republic has come out and said that he doesn't have enough evidence to say that Russia did it. Now, that's big. That's big. You know, Russia was blamed without, you know, it was just declared that Russia was guilty. Russia said, why would we blow up this ammunition facility? Like, how does that benefit us in any way? Well, now we know that the president of the Czech Republic is saying, yeah, he doesn't believe that Russia did it. So what's the response to the president of the Czech Republic? Are they saying, oh, okay, well, I'm glad he let us know? They're calling this treason. The pro-U.S. anti-Russian extremists in the Czech Republic are saying that this was treason on the part of the president. And they want him impeached for saying that he doesn't have enough evidence to say that Russia did it. So this is quite telling. The president of the Czech Republic, what was repeated as absolute indisputable fact, sure, Henry, thanks. What was repeated as absolute indisputable fact that Russia blew up this chemical facility, this ammo facility in 2014, is now basically we're finding out they didn't have any evidence of that. But instead of going, oops, we're sorry, they are trying to, you know, there's talk of impeaching the Czech president for treason for daring to admit this. Now, you know, if this was just like a one-time thing that happened, just a one-time event, you know, we might be able to say, oh, okay, well, this is just a weird thing that happened. But it's not just a one-time event. Not a one-time event at all. Another great example, right? Folks remember when the famous Naira testimony where they had this girl crying on CNN on loop. The babies, they're taking babies out of incubators, you know, and it was about, you know, to build the case for the Iraq War. They had this video of this woman testifying that Saddam Hussein's soldiers in Kuwait were taking babies out of incubators and throwing them on the floor, and then she was crying about it, the babies. And it was all a hoax. It was all a hoax. We find out later that the woman who testified about the babies in the incubators was not under oath. She was not under oath at the time that she testified, and she could never have been in Kuwait at the time. The whole thing was staged for media to make the case for the U.S. military intervention in the Gulf. The Gulf War was staged with a propaganda lie. They had this girl on there crying about the babies, and it was fake. It was a hoax. Because they wanted us, Cardinal Mindszenty, because they wanted us to believe that Saddam Hussein was so awful and we needed to have a military intervention in the Gulf, They staged, it's not an accident. It's not a slip of the tongue. It was a really big lie, okay? When you are having someone who was never in Kuwait, someone who was never there at the scene, get up and cry on TV about babies, being taken from incubators, and then we find out that the woman who gave the testimony was never actually there to see these events happen. So even if they did happen, she wasn't there to see it. We find out they had a special congressional hearing where she wasn't under oath, so she could lie and get away with it, right? That in order to sell the U.S. intervention, war against Iraq, the Gulf War, in order to do that, the U.S. media lied, and a pretty big hoax was carried out in order to justify it. But again, at the time that this happened, there were a number of anti-war organizations in the United States that were preparing to protest the Gulf War at the time this happened. And their phones were ringing 24/7 with people around the country saying, okay, I guess you're against the war, but can't you put out a statement and denounce Saddam Hussein for the awful thing he clearly did? And they said, we don't have evidence that he actually did it. And their phones were ringing around the clock. Oh my God, it's so awful what Saddam did. And this is before the internet. And all the anti-war activists in the country were just being told, okay, it's one thing to be against the war, but you have to denounce evil Saddam Hussein. He took babies out of incubators. He took babies. And thank you for the super chat, by the way. Thank you very much, Javier. He took babies out of incubators. We have to denounce Saddam Hussein. Well, they didn't, right? The International Action Center, Ramsey Clark, they didn't denounce Saddam Hussein because they said, we're not sure this is true. And everyone said to them, I guess the Holocaust didn't happen either, right? I guess the moon landing was fake too, right? Oh, you're so crazy. You love dictators like Saddam Hussein so much. You're a crazy tanky if you don't admit that he's pulling incubators. Look, it's on CNN. It's totally true. And it wasn't true. It was a hoax. It was a big hoax, right? And it was a well-staged hoax. They had a public relations firm. The New York Times revealed all of this. Now, I will never forget a moment in my life, and my deepest apologies to the friend who I'm referring to, because he knows better now. But this happened, and if he's watching, I do apologize. I won't use your name, and I know you know better now. We were young. I remember when I was in high school when the U.S. invaded Iraq. The U.S. actually invaded Iraq. Now, I don't know if folks remember this. We were told that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Oops. Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. But I'll never forget, when the U.S. invaded Iraq, when the U.S., troops arrived in Baghdad, U.S. media went into overdrive, showing us pictures of Iraqis dancing and celebrating. Oh, they're so happy to be liberated, and they're dancing and they're celebrating. And there was this beautiful moment where the Iraqis gathered and they toppled the statue of Saddam Hussein. Aliens, thanks, Alice. They toppled the statue of Saddam Hussein, and it was so beautiful because clearly the Iraqis were so happy that America had intervened and liberated them from evil Saddam Hussein, and they were dancing and celebrating, and they even pulled this statue down in this glorious celebration of freedom. They were liberated. The USA invading Iraq was exactly what the Iraqis wanted. I remember a friend of mine called me on the phone. He's like, can you believe how happy they are? Oh my God, can you believe how happy they were? I was against this war, but now I've seen how happy the Iraqis are. They're celebrating. They're just so happy we invaded their country. This is amazing. Right? And people believe that. And there were a lot of people that were against the war, that had been protesting the war in the lead up to it or whatever, and they saw that on TV and they thought, oh boy, well, I guess the Iraqis did want us to invade. They're just so happy. They're dancing and celebrating and pulling down Saddam Hussein's statue. And, oh, it's just so amazing. Well, now, we found out a couple years later that all of that was staged. LA Times Weekly, other publications revealed that the toppling of the statue was staged by the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army has this division called PSYOPs, which stands for Psychological Operations. And they set up a whole fence around that square where that Saddam Hussein statue was, and they brought in a whole bunch of anti-Saddam Iraqis. They brought in a camera crew, and they told them exactly where to stand, exactly how to pull the statue down. They had rehearsals. It was scripted. The whole thing, just like little Naria, the babies. It was staged. It was a hoax. It was fake. Google this. The Saddam statue toppling was fake. It was staged. No, the Iraqis were not just so happy that the USA had invaded that they spontaneously went out and tore down the statue. That didn't happen. It was staged. It was staged. Look it up. It was staged. U.S. Army PSYOPs gathered the crowd, picked out the statue, told everyone where to stand, told people what to say, had a camera crew. The whole thing was staged. It was propaganda. But I'm sure, right, if Jabba the Bosch, he probably wasn't even born yet at the time, but if Jabba the Bosch was there and I'd said, this is staged, or I'm not sure this is really true, he would have said, that's conspiracy theory. Oh, are you crazy? Are you a crazy person? Oh, you love dictator Saddam Hussein. You're a tanky. You're just like a Nazi. Saying that they didn't pull down the statue is just like saying the Holocaust never happened. That's what they would have said. And that's what they did say, right? I mean, and you listen to Fox News when people were on there questioning anything about the U.S. war, they'd be like, wow, you're insane. You're delusional. Well, it turns out it was staged. Just like the Naria testimony for the Gulf War was staged, and it was a hoax. Just like ammunition factory that blew up in 2014 that everyone was so sure had to be Russia, and now we find out the president of the Czech Republic doesn't think Russia did it. There you go. We anti-imperialists, we have a very good track record. The Gulf of Tonkin. Remember that? The incident in the Gulf of Tonkin? We had to invade. We had to send troops to Vietnam because the Vietnamese attacked one of our ships. Now we find out the Vietnamese did not attack one of our ships. The Gulf of Tonkin was staged. Right? Many, many, many times. There's many examples of this. Many examples of this. U.S. propaganda. Right? They sell their wars with lies and propaganda. And those of us who are tankies, and those of us who know they're liars, and know that they wage these wars so they can grind countries into poverty, destroy emerging anti-imperialist states, beat back countries that are beginning to break free from their system so they can keep the world poor so Wall Street stays rich. Those of us who are tankies, who are hardliners, we know about this. We know about this. And so we don't believe these attacks when they come out. We don't believe these lies. However, there's always this group of, I don't know what you want to call them, sellouts, phonies, fake socialists, I don't know what you want to call them, who insist that because we don't agree with this, because we don't agree with these lies, that we must be delusional, crazy people, and we're dangerous, and we love dictators, and we're extremists and all of this. And then it turns out years later that we were right. They were wrong. There's many examples of this. I'll go over a few more, right? Remember, we find out, remember they said that the chemical weapons attacks in Syria, they clearly had to have been done by the Syrian government. Now we find out there are members of the chemical weapons inspection team who don't think that. There are leaked emails showing that members of the chemical weapons inspection team in Syria didn't think that. That was not the universal opinion. Happy birthday, Adam, and thanks for the super chat. We find out that, it turns out, that the chemical weapons inspection team got their chemical, samples not from the actual site of the chemical attack, but they were given the samples by the white helmets. Right? And that there were members of the chemical inspection team that said, yeah, we don't really think we have proof that the Syrian government committed this chemical attack. Well, how many other examples of this? 1989. How many times did they roll out that picture, 1989, of Tiananmen Square, right? And they show this guy with a flag standing in front of a tank, and they say, oh my God, all these people were peacefully protesting in Tiananmen Square, And then the evil communists rolled over him with a tank, and just rolled over them in a tyrannical fit of rage. Well, now we know that Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times, Bruce Miles of the BBC, there were diplomatic cables from Chile that all confirmed there was not actually a massacre in this square. The students in Tiananmen Square dispersed peacefully. And then outside of the square, there was a lot of killing because there were snipers on rooftops who were shooting Chinese soldiers, and there were people running around the streets with chains and baseball bats and weapons, and there were Chinese soldiers killing other Chinese soldiers, and there was a state of civil war in the streets after the square was cleared. That the whole narrative that we have about Tiananmen Square, and a lot of people still believe, has fallen apart. It's fallen apart. The idea of the evil Chinese commies, they saw these peaceful people marching in Tiananmen Square, and they said, my goodness, their songs of peace fill us with rage. We must kill them. And that's not what happened. We now know that. Many, many sources have confirmed, whether it's the Chilean diplomatic cables that were released by WikiLeaks, whether it's Nicholas Kristof's testimony, whether it's the Bruce Miles of the BBC. That whole narrative of Tiananmen Square has fallen apart. The New York Times, in the lead up to the Tiananmen Square protests, admitted that one of the main motivating factors for the students was racism, right? That they were lynching black students, and there were race riots going on the campuses, and the same student organizations that were demonstrating across China in the lead up to the Tiananmen events were involved in lynching black African students who were studying in China. Yeah, they lied about that too. Look, they have a big, long record of lying. A big, long record of lying. But you're not allowed to think that. They have brainwashed you. I'm serious. They have brainwashed you. They have put a thought-stopping ritual into your mind. You know, every time you start to go, well, maybe it's a lie, you go, oh, I don't want to be a tanky. Oh, I don't want to be a tanky. Oh, I don't want to be one of those people who questions these. You know, this is what they're doing at this point. It's really blatant. They are trying to control your thoughts. They're not trying to feed you false information at this point. They've given up on that, right? With YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and, there's far more freedom of information than they used to be. So they've kind of given up just telling you lies. They tell you lies, but they know a lot of people are going to question it. Marx. They know that. But now they've said, okay, if you start to go down this rabbit hole, you start to notice the pattern of U.S. leaders lying in order to demonize countries like Russia or countries like China or countries like Iraq or countries like Libya or Syria or Venezuela, that if you are one of those people that goes down that rabbit hole, you're a bad person. You're a bad person. That's basically what they're doing, right? So it's not. They don't argue facts anymore, right? You'll notice when I debated Vosh, he didn't argue facts with me about Uyghurs in China. He just argued that because I questioned the narrative, I am a bad person. He's trying to put a thought-stopping ritual into your mind, right? So basically, if at any point you start to question what mainstream media is saying, you're supposed to stop yourself and go, oh, I don't want to be a meme. I don't want to be a bad person. I heard that there's this guy named Caleb, and he talked to somebody who talked to somebody, and he questions these things. I don't want to be a bad person like him, so I won't do that. They're basically getting you to the point that they don't want you to think about facts. They want you to just, they have these categories of bad people. Did you know this? There's this whole category. If you're a good little liberal nowadays, there is a whole list of people. There's a whole list of people that you're not allowed to like, right? There are Trump supporters, there are tankies, there are Nazbols, there are Bernie bros, there are anti-vaxxers, there are, what else? There is a conspiracy theorist. There's all these labels you have to remember. It's like the Daily Memo is practically sent out by these people. This is the list of bad people today. Bad type of person number 1, Trump supporter. Bad type of person number 2, Bernie bro. Bad type of person number 3, tanky. Bad type of person number 4, dangist. Bad type of person number 5, Strauss. It's this bad type of person number 6, class reductionist, right? And every day these people, they go out and it's like they're assigned, they're not telling you what's right and what's wrong. They're not telling you what's actually true. They're not even arguing about facts. They just have this list of bad people, of deplorables. You're a deplorable if you are any of these things, and you deserve to be silenced from social media, and you deserve to be, ostracized. You deserve to be doxxed and lose your job. You deserve to have, mobs of people come to your home and punch you in the face, right? If you question these narratives. That's the way they operate, right? They've given up arguing about facts. They are now arguing that there are good people and bad people, and people who notice certain flaws in the mainstream narrative are bad people, and you don't want to be a bad person, do you? Now you wonder, are they going to start having public executions, maybe burning people at the stake, perhaps, right? You don't want to be a witch. She's a witch. She's a witch. I knew she was a witch. They're going to start burning them, right? I mean, is that going to be the next stage in all of this? Is that we have a public burnings of dissidents? All right. Industry in U.S. South change since. All right, are they gonna start burning people? I mean, what are they gonna do? Because it's like it starts to get so bizarre and irrational. Another great example, just while we're on this kick of talking about examples of things, why not? Here's another great example. Do you remember when Venezuela was burning? Had burned their own food truck. A food truck. The great Americans were just out of the goodness of their heart. They saw all these poor Venezuelans starving. Starving because of evil socialism. They're all starving because of socialism. Evil socialists, they don't want people to have food, because they think food is capitalist or something. So either the evil Venezuelan leaders were starving the people of Venezuela, and then after that, the great Americans, they wanted to help the poor Venezuelans, so they set up a food caravan to just bring food to the poor Venezuelans, right? It was just, it was just the nicest thing. Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, and they all just wanted to bring food to these Venezuelans. And then the evil Venezuelans lit the food truck on fire. They burned the food truck. Oh my goodness, they were so determined to keep their people from getting food, they burned the food truck. Well, then the video came out. And the video revealed that actually the right-wing Venezuelans lit the food truck on fire themselves. Yeah. They lit their own food truck on fire in the hopes of framing the Venezuelan government. And the New York Times was supposed to admit this. Max Blumenthal, Gray Zone, revealed this, that the U.S. and anti-Venezuela, anti-Maduro Venezuelans burned their own food truck to try and stage a war against Venezuela. This is a fact, right? This is not disputed. It is on video. They lit their own food caravan on fire in the hopes of being able to say that Venezuela had burned the food caravan so the U.S. could invade. All right? Now, my question is, how many more times are people going to fall for this? How many times, right? Because every time this happens, the same people go, oh my God, sure, Saddam Hussein didn't take babies from incubators. Sure, Tiananmen was not, what they said it was. But this time it's real. You have to admit that. Do you love dictators? Destiny. And every time we end up being right. Every time we end up being right. Consistently. Every time they start screeching, the wheels of humanitarian intervention, the babies, every time those wheels start screeching, when the dust clears, when the war is over, when the country's been bombed and destroyed, when the anti-imperialist government has been overthrown, we then find out, oopsie poopsie, oh yeah, now luckily in the Venezuela situation, they weren't able to full on go to war with Venezuela. But they tried. They tried their hardest. They really tried. Don't say they didn't try. And what shocks me is that these misleaders, these fake socialists, it's like their assignment is to make sure that everyone goes along with this, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Libya, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia, whether it's China. It's like their assignment is to get on YouTube and in the name of socialism, announce that if you do not agree with this, yeah, very good point, Dan. I'm writing that down. That if you don't agree with this, you're a bad person. And we have been right over and over and over and over again. Over and over again, we've been right. Meanwhile, they have been wrong. It's just something important to think about, right? And here we go. This is another example. Czech munitions factory. President of the Czech Republic admits they don't have any evidence that Russia did it. Great example. Great example. Folks, if anyone starts arguing for something by saying everybody knows, there's a very good chance they're wrong. Very good chance they're wrong, right? The everybody knows argument is a very, 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 very weak argument. At one point, everyone knew the earth was flat. Duh, look outside, the earth is flat. And we later learned that was not true. At one point, everybody knew that diseases were not caused by germs, they were caused by evil spirits. And the way to cure yourself from diseases was with magic. When someone starts saying, yeah, everybody knows, that's a very good sign that they're lying, because everybody knows ain't an argument. I don't necessarily want to open this can of worms, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but take, for example, 9/11 truth, right? If you question the official narrative of 9/11, in the United States, we treat, U.S. media pretends you don't exist, you're treated as a wingnut, as an extremist. Go outside the United States, right? And the response, if you say, hey, I got some questions about 9/11, right? And that's it. And that's all I say. I don't pretend I know what happened. I just have some questions about what we're told happened. That's all I know. And I don't pretend to know exactly what really happened. I just have some questions about the official story, but that's it. But, in the United States, if you go there, right? If you say, hey, I've got some questions about the official story, your response is, oh boy, well, everybody knows that, that there's not, the official story of 9/11 is true. Everybody knows. Well, and first of all, they've actually done polls that show, even within the United States, not everybody knows that. And there's a very high percentage of Americans that question the official story of 9/11. Some polls even showed it was almost a third. But, so it's not everybody knows, number one. Number two, if you go to the Middle East, in the Middle East, everybody knows that Israel did it. Now, I don't think Israel did it, but in the Middle East, and many, many countries in the Middle East, it is considered common knowledge that Israel did it. I have no evidence that Israel did it. I'm not making that allegation. But if you go to many parts of the Middle East, it's considered the official story that Israel did 9/11, right? So you could just as easily, if you were in, Iran or in Lebanon or in Jordan or in Syria, and somebody said, hey, Al-Qaeda pulled off 9/11, you could be like, everybody knows Israel did 9/11. And, you would be right, because that is the common knowledge in the Middle East. Now, I don't have any evidence that Israel did 9/11. I'm not making that allegation. But that is considered common knowledge in the Middle East. If you go to South America, again, you go to Venezuela, you go to Bolivia, you go to Nicaragua, you could easily say, everybody knows the American government did 9/11, right? You could easily say that, because in Venezuela and in Bolivia and Nicaragua, it is considered common knowledge that the American government did 9/11. Fidel Castro wrote a whole thing, and thank you, David. Thank you very much. And very important, thank you very much. And I hope you go to that day remembering workers on the job. Very important. Thank you, David. Shout out to David Fox. He gave a great talk at our last web conference. If you go to the socialist countries of Latin America, they believe what Fidel Castro said about, Fidel Castro and his columns that were published. Fidel Castro says that it was clearly a missile that hit the Pentagon. That's his opinion. I'm not necessarily endorsing that view. But I'm saying that if this appeal to everybody knows changes where you are. In Latin America, everybody knows the U.S. government did it. In the Middle East, everybody knows that Israel did it. In the United States, everybody knows that that clearly it was, the official story is true, except they've done polls that show actually 1 in 3 Americans don't think the official story of 9/11 is true. So this everybody knows stuff doesn't work, right? People know different things. Truth is not subject to public opinion, my friends. Let me just break it down to you, right? Just like at one point, everybody knew the earth was flat. The earth ain't flat. Doesn't matter. You took a vote in the year 1400. Is the earth round or is it flat? That would not change the way the earth was. Truth, this everybody knows. People only know that because of American media. People only know that because the dominant opinion crafting institutions in the West, in the United States, that they put forward that viewpoint. And increasingly, polls are showing Americans are more distrustful of those opinion crafting institutions than ever before. People don't trust our leaders, and that doesn't just apply to the right and the Trump supporters, that applies to the left as well, right? There's a lot of people on the left who very, very much don't trust mainstream media, and there's a lot of people on the right that don't trust mainstream media. So even the everybody knows stuff, it used to be, sure, in the 90s, everybody knew. Nowadays, I wouldn't even go that far. So there you go. There you go. Very important to understand. Now, did want to touch on a couple things. Again, we're going to get to the super chats and the Q&A pretty soon. So if you got a super chat, shoot me a question. I'll shoot you an answer. But a couple things, quick things. Humility as a virtue. That's a good question. Couple things. Now, folks, I have worked very, very hard to talk about why the fall of the Soviet Union happened, why the USA was victorious in the Cold War, and what we as Marxists and communists can learn from that. And it disturbs me to see there's not very much discussion of that in communist and leftist circles. And that's one of the main reasons I put out We Are City Builders. I mean, the opening essay in We Are City Builders, it's City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. It's something I wrote in 2018. This is very, very important. This piece is very, very important because I start out, it's an overall history, but in the second part, I go into great detail about why the Soviet Union fell, how that was carried out, and what that means for leftists. And there's not really discussion of it. Why did the Soviet Union fall? Why did the global communist movement not see the fall of the Soviet Union coming? What can we learn from that? And there's not really discussion of that. Trotskyite groups in the United States, they would go, we told you so. That was their response. The Revolutionary Communist Party in the United States, RCP, they put out a book, Phony Communism is Dead, Long Live Real Communism. There was not really discussion. Why did the Soviet Union fall, right? The response of most communist and leftist groups was to just say, oh, the Soviet Union fell because they're dumb revisionists. That's not an answer. That's not an answer. And the avoiding of that question, is something that is a big problem in left-wing circles. The fall of the Soviet Union, 1991, when I was 4 years old, the Soviet Union fell, and that was a huge development in terms of geopolitics. Global communism was significantly weakened. Western neoliberal capitalism went into overdrive and just, devastated the world for a decade. Cuba had massive food shortages. Millions of North Koreans died, all across Eastern Europe, sex trafficking and heroin addiction, and millions of people died in Russia and the surrounding countries as a result. In the United States, we had, a huge attack on organized labor. And it was, the fall of the Soviet Union was a catastrophic event for every working person in the world. It was very, very, very catastrophic. Why did it happen? Why did it happen? And the fact that there's not more extensive discussion of that, and what we can learn from it when we talk about these things is a bit of a problem. Caleb, I'm watching you on Roku with my 77-year-old mom, who was in the Iron Workers Union in southern Nevada and Arizona. Great. Wow. Thank you, old gringo. I hope she enjoys it. But it was a catastrophic event. The fall of the Soviet Union, it had horrendous results for the people of the world. And there's not really been a lot of talk about why it happened. The Trotskyites and the Maoists say, I hate to say I told you so. Oh, look, you're not real communists. There was some discussion of it among the communist parties of the world. But overall, there's not really been a big discussion of it because, having a discussion, and I realize this, having a conversation about why the Soviet Union fell, it forces a lot of leftists to face some realities they don't want to face, right? And that can happen, right? There's a great talk by an intellectual named Sean Gervasi, and it's called How the CIA Terminated the Soviet Union. It's great. He gets into detail about, the arms race and such. Great, okay? And there's a lot of people who say the Soviet Union, it never had a moment of peace. That's true. Never had a moment of peace. And it was invaded at first by 15 countries. Winston Churchill said to strangle the Bolshevik baby in the cradle. We know then World War II devastated the place, and they achieved real economic miracles despite all of that. Raised millions from poverty, industrialized, fully electrified. But there you go. Anyhow, why did the Soviet Union fall? Right, and you talk about the arms race from the United States, how the arms race, forced many large amounts of money to be spent on weapons in the Soviet Union, and that depleted the state budget, and that caused problems. That certainly happened. But if you really get into why the Soviet Union fell, it really points to the reality, the big reality, that the liberals were more of a threat than the Republicans. That allies of the Soviet Union, leftists and communists in the United States, thought that the military-industrial complex was the main enemy. That Ronald Reagan escalating the arms race was potentially leading us to World War III, that nuclear power companies, were, and allies of the Soviet Union around the world focused on protesting the liberals. Best books. Focused on protesting the liberals, protesting the conservatives, protesting the military-industrial complex, protesting the nuclear power plants. That was the focus. The focus of the left was against the military-industrial complex. And what was not realized was that it was the liberals who brought down the Soviet Union. It was liberals who brought down the Soviet Union. Let me say that again. It was liberals who brought down the Soviet Union. Conservatives, the military-industrial complex, caused the Soviet Union lots of problems, right? They caused the Soviet Union problems. They had to spend more on their military. But it was ultimately ideological contamination that brought down the Soviet Union. It was the confusion of the Marxist movement, the manipulation of the Marxist movement, the insertion of liberal ideology into the Marxist movement, postmodernism, that brought down the Soviet Union. The Congress for Cultural Freedom program, right? The counterculture, the identification of Marxism and leftist ideas with the revolutionary intelligentsia, the courting of the Soviet bureaucracy, right? A liberal, liberals in the West, counterculture elements courting the Soviet bureaucracy, events like the Prague Spring, right? These things had a lot more to do with the fall of the Soviet Union. Because ultimately, the fall of the Soviet Union would not have happened if a large section of the Soviet Communist Party did not surrender, did not throw in the towel. And the only way that they were able to get to a situation where a large section of the Soviet government threw in the towel was through decades and decades and decades of ideological contamination. The Congress for Cultural Freedom program and funding fake Marxists and, the counterculture movements, the identification of Marxism with the bohemian, revolutionary intelligentsia, the funding and promotion of Trotskyism, the funding and promotion of anarchism, intellectuals like Noam Chomsky. All of this was very, very key in muddying the waters and creating the level of ideological confusion where you could get to the point that in 1991, a big section of the Soviet Communist Party thought the United States was their friend, thought they could dissolve the Soviet Union and everything would be okay. That ideological contamination, which wasn't just in the Soviet Union, it was an ideological contamination of our entire movement, of our entire Marxist movement. That is largely what brought down the Soviet Union. And the belief that the military-industrial complex was the main danger. That was a huge mistake, right? And following the lead of the Soviet Union, following the lead of the Democratic Party, with the orientation that the military-industrial complex was the main enemy, that was a huge mistake, right? And that Marxism has been contaminated. Marxism and liberalism are not the same thing. Liberalism is an ideology that puts individuals above all else, breaks down any sense of community. Liberalism is an ideology, liberalism and postmodernism, that says there is no truth. China hard against examination. It's an ideology that says there is no truth. It's an ideology that says there is no grand narrative for all humanity. It's just competing narratives. Postmodernism, liberalism brought down the Soviet Union. And that's a reality that people don't want to recognize. And it's hard for a lot of these old Marxists to swallow that they should have been fighting the liberals. They should have been fighting the liberals for control of their own movement. They should have been ideologically fighting back against the Trotskyite, anarchist, postmodernist contagion that confused and disoriented the global Marxist movement, confused and disoriented even the Soviet Communist Party. They should have been fighting against that much harder. Because at the end of the day, the military-industrial complex, while they were capable of escalating the arms race, while they were capable of costing the Soviet Union a lot of money, they also had a rally around the flag effect. They also had a rally around the flag effect. They also, reinforced the anti-imperialist narratives of the Soviet Union. This is a reality that many people don't want to acknowledge. This is a reality that no one really wants to acknowledge, but it is certainly truth. It is truth. As much as folks don't want to hear it, this is truth. And I am really the only voice in the Western left who talks about this. There are some people who talk about it, I guess, in a very, very simplistic and naive way. There are some people who talk about it in this very, very, they abandoned true Marxism. That's not what I'm saying, right? And in the developing world, there's a lot of understanding of this, right? And you'll notice that communists in the developing world are quite illiberal, So this is what needs to be understood, and this is why the Center for Political Innovation project is so important. And this is why my work is so important, is because I am having the conversation about ideological contamination, about how Marxism is not liberalism, right? And I just wanted to share that with all of you. I mean, if you want to know why this stuff is important, you want to know why We Are City Builders is important, there you go. So I just wanted to end my opening remarks by saying that. So that's my opening remarks for today. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you, as I drink the unnamed diet beverage. Names and locations. Who's with us today? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Los Angeles, Devani is with us. Ryan in Oakland is with us. Houston, Texas. Cleveland, Wisconsin. Springfield, Missouri. Mo in Toronto. Chaya in Montreal. Cole from Calgary. Jeff in Tulsa. Tara Hoot here. New York, Los Angeles, South London. Antoine from France. Kieran from San Diego. JT24 from Mississippi. Shaman from Kerala. Seattle. Kendall in San Diego. Oklahoma. Puerto Rico. Aqua KCMO, that's Kansas City, Missouri. Nikki from Paris, France. Ramiro in East LA. Shout out to you, Ramiro, good friend of the program. Newcastle, England. Detroit. Very, very good. Orange Duke thinks I'm on fire. El Monte, at work in El Monte. Sherman Oaks, very, very good. Graham Norton. Mika in South Texas. Welcome, Mika. Joe from Maryland, Upper West Side of NYC, says Jab initials. Welcome. Very good. I'm not too far from you. Midwest, says Comrade Lo-Fi. Tacoma, Adam from Nevada. Clydebank, Mankato, Minnesota. Union, New Jersey. Austin, Texas. Mosin from Iran. San Francisco. Bree from Glendale, California. Balthazar in Oakland. Chicago. Naples, Florida. Greetings and solidarity. George, Vienna, Austria. Union City, New Jersey. Tampa, Florida. Herb Bryant, good friend of the program. Welcome, Herb Bryant. Joey from Belize. Troy in Kansas City, Missouri. Stephen from Southern California. Space Communist from Coronita, California, Texas. Montebello, California. Calgary, Alberta. Flushing, Queens. Holly Horn. British Columbia, Canada. Los Angeles. Northern Michigan, A Better America. Staten Island. Richard Bruce says much love. Very good. Nate in Chicago. Leipzig, East Germany. Etatist. Welcome, Etatist. All right, folks. I will start answering your super chat questions. Rafael in Brazil. I will start answering your super chat questions. And I will start answering those questions. If you have more super chat questions, I will make a point of answering those as well. So keep them rolling in, keep the super chats rolling in, and we will start answering our questions. Cardinal Mindszenty, that was Chaya, asked about Cardinal Mindszenty. The leader of the Hungarian anti-Soviet opposition was a Catholic priest, clergyman, Cardinal Mindszenty. Cardinal Mindszenty was a fascist sympathizer during the Second World War. He'd been an admirer of the Nazis and a sympathizer with the Nazis after the Soviet Union, liberated Hungary, after Hungary adopted a Soviet, socialist system. At that point, Mindszenty started leading the Roman Catholics of Hungary to protest against the Soviet government, culminating in the events of 1956. The so-called Hungarian Revolt or Hungarian Uprising of 1956. And the events of 1956, the Hungarian Uprising, were celebrated by Trotskyites around the world as a great, glorious uprising against Stalinism. They were celebrated by anarchists around the world as a great, glorious uprising against Stalinism. And in fact, even the leader of, a renegade leader of the Communist Party USA named John Gates. John Gates was a leader of the Communist Party USA, and even he considered the Hungarian events of 1956 to be a glorious uprising against Stalinism. U.S. media went into overdrive celebrating the Hungarian uprising as a glorious revolt. However, even Mao Zedong was a little bit tempted to support the Hungarian uprising. So Mao sent Chinese military people to meet with the Hungarian rebels and see if they were, genuine communists. And Mao met with them and said, no, these people are counter-revolutionaries and fascists. So Mao sent his military to join the Soviet Union in putting down and crushing the Hungarian uprising. Now, there are many sources on the events of Hungary in 1956. From a communist perspective, you can read a very good book by Herbert Apotheker. Herbert Apotheker, the most well-respected scholar of African-American history during the 1950s and 60s. He very much went into African-American history. He was marginalized and blacklisted, but he's widely respected. Herbert Apotheker. Energy to read. He wrote a book called The Truth About Hungary, which is worth studying. There are some other sources. I mean, one source on Hungary that I have long pointed people towards is Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, Ohio has many, many, many Hungarians in it. Many Hungarians who fled Hungary in the aftermath of 1956 moved to Cleveland, Ohio. And I have often said to Trotskyites and anarchists and others, you know, these Hungarians that you insist are the real communists rising up against Stalinism, why don't you go talk to them? Right? Go ask people in Hungary. Go to a Hungarian bar, go to a Hungarian restaurant, and ask them, say, you guys are the true communists, right? You were rising up against the Soviets because they weren't real communists, but you guys are like real workers' council communists, right? You and Cardinal Mindszenty, it was a workers' revolt against Stalinism. And I dare you to do that. I dare you to go to Cleveland, to a Hungarian neighborhood, and ask people whose parents fled Hungary in 1956. Your parents were like the true communists, right? They were like Trotskyists, right? They were anarchists. They were like pure communists, right? Yeah, go and talk to them. And you will learn very quickly that the Hungarian revolt was not a communist uprising. And actually, one thing that I find to be hilarious, very, very hilarious, is that one of the most outspoken supporters of the Hungarian uprising is none other than noted Holocaust denier and Nazi David Irving, right? You ever heard of David Irving? He's the big top Holocaust denier in Europe. One of his early books is called The Hungarian Tragedy, and it's all about how the Hungarian people were rising up against those evil communists, and this great, Catholic leader named Cardinal Mindszenty, who was so amazing, was leading them, and it was an evil communist Jewish conspiracy that they didn't send troops in to stand with the Hungarian uprising against the Soviets. So David Irving is one of the big sources who points to how fascist the Hungarian uprising and Cardinal Mindszenty really was. David Irving, the Holocaust denier, thinks that is a good thing. So it's pretty clear that the fascists and Nazi sympathizers generally knew what side they were on in the Hungarian revolt. In fact, Sebastian Gorka, who was a member of the Trump administration and a conservative and a right-winger, would wear medals associated with his family and the right-wing elements in the Hungarian revolt of 1956. And it's to the far right. The right-wing extremists, the Nazi sympathizers, the extreme right, they all know what side they were on in 1956. It's only the confused synthetic left that is confused and thinks that it was a progressive revolt. It clearly wasn't. It was not a progressive uprising by any means. Now, what's interesting is apparently Cardinal Mindszenty, he was arrested by Soviet officials. Apparently, he was persuaded, I guess, to change his views. He came out of prison, and basically, he confessed to having been collaborating with the West to stage the revolt. And there's a lot written about Cardinal Mindszenty and his, how, they say he was brainwashed in the communist prison and such. And that's a little bit interesting, too. The more you read about Cardinal Mindszenty and his time in prison and coming out and how he confessed to everything, and then people say his confession wasn't legit. It's an interesting case. There's a lot there if you look into it. There's a lot there if you look into Cardinal Mindszenty and his, But yes, he had been a Nazi sympathizer during the Second World War. He was an anti-communist, and he got arrested for leading this uprising against the Soviets. And the Soviets did a number on him psychologically in prison. Let me just put it that way. And honestly, who knows how much of that stuff is true. But there's a lot written about how, he eventually repudiated himself. So there you go. That's the first Super Chat question, Cardinal Mindszenty. Next Super Chat was someone said, Marx and Engels wore suits. Well, I don't know if the person's being a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I mean, it is true that, if you look at photographs of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, they are wearing suits. But, that was the 1800s, for goodness sakes. They did have big, huge beards, which was also very popular back then. My whole thing about suit socialism is just we need to get out of the image of socialists as grungy, dirty, counterculture bohemians. We need to get out of that mindset. We need to be responsible worker politicians, out of the movement to the masses. We need to be responsible worker politicians. We need to understand that if you really love your country, you really love your community, you should be a socialist. We're socialists because we want to save America, not because we want to destroy America. And that we are not, deranged, bomb-throwing extremists. We're not, grimy, greasy protesters and sloppy people who need to go get a job. We are responsible, patriotic Americans who love our country, love our family, love our community, and we are worker politicians. And we are entering politics on behalf of our class, the proletariat. And our class suffers because of imperialism. And our class suffers because of capitalism. And it is a way to show that we are responsible worker politicians. That's what the suit thing is about. And if you can't afford a suit, that's fine, right? I'm not trying to shame you for not being able to afford one. But many times I have heard African Americans say that there is a common joke about white people in the United States. How wealthy is a white person? How can you tell how wealthy a white person is? How badly they dress. That dressing badly is a privilege, right? In order to wear ripped jeans and to look grimy, that is a privilege. It is a privilege to dress badly. Working people with job interviews and daily jobs they have to get to want to look presentable. They take pride in how they look and all of that. And this grimy, punk rock kind of look is a little bit, there's an element of privilege in that. But regardless, you can wear whatever you want to wear. I'm not telling you how to dress, but I wear a suit for my job. I have to. But I encourage socialists and leftists and revolutionaries to wear suits because, again, I argue we need worker politicians. We need working class people to enter politics on their own behalf to oppose imperialism and to get America's working families to understand that we want to make their lives better. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families, and we need worker politicians, responsible working class people entering the political process on their own behalf to help make a better country. I'm a socialist because I want to save America, not because I want to destroy America. All righty. That said, next Super Chat question. Again, if you've got more, I'm always able to answer that. Industry in the U.S. South, how has it changed since slavery? Well, following slavery, you had the sharecropper system. It's actually kind of interesting. So immediately after the Civil War, they tried to have slavery and not call it that, right? It's really horrendous. But so the Civil War happened, right? And the U.S. said that slavery was abolished, a constitutional amendment was passed. And so in all the southern states, a lot of these slave owners tried to pull a fast one. And they came up with apprenticeships, right? And they would say, well, these aren't my slaves, they're my apprentices, right? And they had, and the U.S. Army had to go and occupy the South to stop that because they were basically trying to say, okay, well, yeah, they tried to have a loophole. They tried to pull a fast one. And so the U.S. Army was sent to occupy the U.S. South to make sure they didn't pull a fast one, to say, cut that out, right? They're not apprentices. Slavery, done, period, right? And so there was a period called Reconstruction. And Reconstruction is probably one of the most hopeful periods in U.S. history. W.E.B. Du Bois, the great scholar, wrote a very good book called Black Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, public education was introduced for black and white people in the South. All across the South, low-income white people, black people didn't have schools to go to. But the U.S. military occupied the South and set up public education. And so poor white people got to go to school because of the liberation of black people from slavery. In many parts of the South, they did ban former Confederates from voting. If you were a former Confederate, you were not allowed to vote. And as a result of that, we had, the first black senator, first black congressman. Many black people were elected to the U.S. government, to the federal government because of that. Reconstruction was a very hopeful time. In some areas, there was land redistribution. They would seize the property of Confederate slave owners, and they would redistribute the land. Now, it didn't happen very often. We know the very famous promise of 40 acres and a mule. That didn't happen. But for a brief period, there was a very, very brief period where there was actually some progress that was happening. Now, the Union Army was occupying the South, and it was what they called the Radical Republicans. Thaddeus Stevens and others were pushing forward some very, very, very progressive policies. That's why the Ku Klux Klan was formed, right? The Ku Klux Klan was formed in Tennessee as armed resistance to Reconstruction. And the Ku Klux Klan began murdering black people who voted and threatening radical Republicans, people who came from the North, who were supporters of the Union Army, or like local politicians, who were white, who were supporters of the black people and supporters of land redistribution. They called them carpetbaggers. That was the term. They were called carpetbaggers, and they would often, kill them and torture them to death. So then Ulysses S. Grant, who was the U.S. president, sent the army to the South again, and he had the Ku Klux Klan Act, which made it a federal crime to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and sent the army to fight the Klan. And federal troops were used to put down the Ku Klux Klan. And it was largely successful. If you were a member of the Klan, they killed you. And they went down there and they executed a number of Klansmen, and the KKK was wiped out. What's interesting is Jesse James. I don't know if folks know the name Jesse James. Jesse James was a Confederate guerrilla in Missouri. He had fought, as an insurgent, a pro-Confederate insurgent in Kansas and Missouri. After the war, he couldn't, he'd killed so many U.S. Army soldiers and such that he couldn't just, join the, go back to civilian life. So he became Jesse James, the famous outlaw. And Jesse James, he was never in the Ku Klux Klan, but when the Ku Klux Klan started doing their attacks in Tennessee, he started robbing trains with a Ku Klux Klan mask on to make a political statement. Jesse James was not a good person. We're told that Jesse James, they've made him into this cowboy hero. Hollywood has romanticized Jesse James and made him, you'd think he's I don't know, you'd think he's a Western hero. He was not. He was a pro-Confederate insurgent who after the war became a pro-Confederate, terrorist. The Missouri state legislature was dominated by, pro-slavery and anti-Lincoln and anti-Republican forces. So the Missouri state legislature passed resolutions honoring Jesse James. He would go and he would rob banks. Banks were located in the North, right? So they were associated with the North. He would rob railroads, again, associated with the North. He wasn't a Robin Hood. He would show up, he would shoot his gun off a couple times and make big speeches about how the Northerners are coming down here and stirring up the black people and taking away our rights. Come on, man. All right, and he was an insurgent basically. He was a terrorist, and he wasn't Robin Hood. And there's a folk band from the 1960s, the Kingston Trio, and they rewrote the lyrics to the Jesse James song. And they said, he robbed from the poor and he gave to the rich. He never did a friendly thing. And and that's about right. Jesse James was not a good person. He was a terrorist. He was a murderer, he was not a good guy. But Hollywood has romanticized him. And that's part of the whole mythology of the South. But anyway, so for a long time, you had the period of Reconstruction where the Union Army was occupying the South. Then after that, there was a compromise where the Democrats and the Republicans compromised, pulled the troops out of the South. And then you had the tenant farmer system, the sharecropper system. The sharecropper system in Arkansas had a white cross burned in their house for being nice to the public. Right. That's exactly right, old gringo. That kind of thing happened. And after the Union Army was pulled out of the South, you had the sharecropper system, where basically the former slave owners, they had sharecroppers, where they had people who worked the land, and it was almost feudalism. It was not technically feudalism because you were not bound, you were allowed to leave. You were not technically bound to the person who owned the land, but it was sharecropper, where you would, and there were white sharecroppers and there were black sharecroppers, and they were small farmers who had a little tract of land that was owned by some wealthy landowner. They would work the land, and they would give the landlord their obligation, their rent, basically, and then they could eat what was left over. And it was rigged. A lot of times it was rigged, to make sure they barely got what they needed. They were constantly in debt. The sharecropper system, and it was poor white people and poor black people throughout the South. Western media on domestic issues. Western on domestic issues. And, throughout the South, there was the sharecropper system. Now, as the labor movement started to rise in the 1930s, and then especially in the 50s, you saw an increasing number of industries moving to the South to avoid labor unions because of racism, right? The South, that's why, the South never had a strong union movement. In Gastonia, North Carolina, you had the communists who organized the textile workers. You had sharecropper strikes in the 1930s by the communists, but about the mid-30s, at the time the Roosevelt coalition was formed, and this is a deep tragedy, but I'm just telling you, this is reality, okay? Politics, again, it's not like you get a blank piece of paper. So in the 1920s, the Communist Party was given the orientation by the Comintern to support the struggles of black people. So communists made it a priority of supporting black people and the struggle against Jim Crow segregation and of organizing the South. And the Communist Party actually had the slogan, organize the South, right? And so communist organizers in the 1920s and the early 30s went to the South and organized unions. And there were textile workers in Gastonia, North Carolina, a very, very big strike in Gastonia, North Carolina in 1928. People died. It was like a war in North Carolina as black and white workers were in a single union. They were in a single union led by communists. It was a communist-controlled labor union. They put out declarations about what this plant would be like in a Soviet America. I mean, the strike of Gastonia was a communist-led strike. And in other parts of the South, 1934, there was a sharecroppers strike all across South Carolina, all across the South, and there were assassinations, there were textile work. But, the communists, they were in the period where they were basically, the communists argued that the American Federation of Labor, because it was led by social democrats and reformists, was the main enemy. So their strategy was to organize the unorganized. And workers in the South, black and white, had not been ever unionized. So the communists wanted to organize them into a communist-controlled union and kind of circumvent the American Federation of Labor that was led by social democrats. Then, however, when the Popular Front started, right, Roosevelt was the president who was anti-fascist, okay? Roosevelt was anti-fascist and recognized the Soviet Union, legalized labor unions. So the Communist Party's orientation shifted, and instead of organizing the unorganized and trying to fight against the Social Democrats, the policy became to support Roosevelt, who was a Democrat, against fascism. So the communists, they joined the AFL, they got kicked out, they formed the Congress of Industrial Organization. The labor movement at that point shifted to the north, right? And you had the Flint sit-down strike, you had the sit-down strike wave all throughout the Midwest, you had the Teamsters, the rise of the Teamsters Union, and, communists were focused on organizing in the north at that period. And Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party USA, shut down the Communist Party's labor organizing in the South because of the fact that it hurt the Democratic Party. And Earl Browder, William Z. Foster writes about this. This was Browder's revisionism. But because basically the orientation of the communists was to support Roosevelt, because of that, the Communist Party stopped labor organizing in the South, okay? And that was a huge betrayal. However, they did, and this was an amazing contribution. So at the same time they stopped labor organizing in the South, they started raising the issue of Jim Crow segregation and linking it to fascism. Right? You had the International Labor Defense, which was the Communist Party's legal group, started defending African Americans who were charged, with crimes. The Scottsboro Nine, or the Scottsboro Boys, a very famous case. The Communist Party, while they weren't organizing unions in the South anymore, started representing black people who were charged with crimes. Angelo Herndon, who was a leader of the Communist Party in, I believe it was in Alabama, and he was charged with trying to incite a rebellion of black people, and he was facing the death penalty. There was a whole international campaign to free Angelo Herndon, and it was successful. And eventually, the Supreme Court of the United States freed Angelo Herndon and said that he should not be executed. And what the Communist Party did was they started linking Jim Crow segregation and Nazism in the public mind. And Vito Marcantonio, who was a Communist Party-aligned member of Congress here in New York City, started introducing anti-lynching bills into the U.S. Congress to make the death penalty for participating in lynchings. And that was big. And so the Communist Party started arguing that Jim Crow was the American version of Adolf Hitler. And that was very effective propaganda because many Americans felt that Hitler was their enemy. And many Americans then were led to understand that Jim Crow was kind of the American version of Adolf Hitler. And that was very effective. It was very, very effective. And in fact, during World War II, the Superman comic books had Superman fight the Ku Klux Klan. And as Superman would fight the Ku Klux Klan in the Superman comic books, he would say, why, the Ku Klux Klan are just like Hitler. They are trying to divide us between black and white. And I mean, it was very effective. So while the Communist Party, their shutting down of labor organizing in the South was a big betrayal. Big betrayal. At the same time, the anti-fascist pivot kind of opened the door to the beginnings of making a broader civil rights movement. So it's complicated. But ultimately, now a lot of industry in the United States has moved to the South to avoid labor laws, right? I mean, the South is the center of the right-to-work states. That's what they call it, where they don't allow closed shop contracts. Right? In most states, a union, can have a closed shop contract, meaning that, if a factory, right, if it's unionized, only union employees can work there. But in most southern states, they have what's called a right-to-work law, which is a law that basically says that that's illegal, you can't have a closed shop, right? That workers in a factory are not obligated to join the union, and you can't do that. But then it gets even crazier because then the union is still legally obligated to represent workers who don't pay dues. I mean, it's really awful, right? And the right to work laws, these anti-labor laws that prevent labor unions from having a closed shop, and basically, it's awful. It's part of the anti-labor drive, and it comes from the South. And why was anti-labor laws? Why were they so effective and passed all throughout the South? Because of racism. So, in the civil rights movement in the South, you can talk about the Democratic Party and the role of organized labor in that. So there's a lot there, but I hope that this gave an answer. But anyway, next super chat question: corporatism and fascism. Well, okay, so when we talk about corporatism, this is a common mistake that I see in left-wing circles. We'll just clear this up. So a corporation, right, that's like an entity, right? If you form a business, there are many different kinds of corporations, stock ownership, corporate charters, etc. Okay, it's a business in the United States. In Mussolini's Italy, the corporation or the corporate was a completely different entity. Basically, Mussolini, in order to have Bonapartist control over the economy, he formed this body that was led by leaders of the fascist government that had a representative of the labor union and a representative of the fascist party and a representative of the company. And it was this body called the corporate that oversaw every corporation. And it was this government entity that oversaw every corporation. In fascist Italy, every worker was required to join the government-controlled labor union. And they would join the government-controlled labor union, and the government-controlled, like fascist labor union, communist unions were illegal, but labor unions, that were government-controlled, fascist, the fascist labor union, the company, and a leader of the fascist party, they formed a corporate, it was called, and that was the basis for an attempt on the part of the Mussolini government to control the economy. It's actually interesting, if you read the lectures on Comrade Togliatti, the leader of Palmiro Togliatti, the leader of the Italian Communist Party, has lectures on fascism. And if you can get a copy of that, international publishers here in the USA printed them. And that the economy of fascist Italy was constantly being adjusted. It was a Bonapartist state. You had a very big, powerful state that was regulating and controlling the economy. But the economic model was constantly being adjusted and changed. Some cases you had nationalizations. Other cases you had almost complete private control. And it was an attempt to stabilize the economy with heavy government intervention. It was fascism, but it was constantly evolving. The corporate state, that's what the fascists, called their government, their economic form. They called it a corporate state. It had different forms, but the corporate, it wasn't the same thing as over here. Okay. All right. Destiny doesn't believe in workers' control. Okay, I mean, Destiny is so full of garbage. You know, he tried to tell me that the Soviet Union never had any economic growth. I ripped him a new one on that, and then it all just fell out of the back of his mind when he debated Richard Wolff. Did you see that? It's like, oh, he tried, and it's a bluff. This is what anti-communists always do. They say communism has failed everywhere it's ever been tried, and you show them actually that's mathematically not true. And so then they go, oh yeah, and they try to change this conversation. But then the next debate they have, they start out at square one. Communism's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. They know it's false. That's been demonstrated false, but they assume that you don't know that, right? Because they don't, they're liars. Anti-communism is based on lies. You'll notice when Destiny debated me, and this was kind of a great moment in the debate. I don't know who that is, Dove Reed. I just don't know who that is. When Destiny and I debated, Destiny said that Venezuela's problems started in 2014 when they pivoted toward socialism. I said, that's interesting, Destiny. That's interesting because, my understanding, I've always heard from everybody else that Venezuela's had problems ever since they were socialist. And so he changed the argument. If it hadn't been me, if he hadn't Googled me before the debate and seen that I've written extensively about Venezuela, he would have not argued that way. He would have just said Venezuela's starving ever since they've been socialist. But he knew that I knew my stuff, so he restructured his argument. This is what anti-communists do. They don't really, they're not honest, right? They know they're full of lies. They know that their job is to demonize some countries in order to make the case for U.S. intervention and all of that. And so, you'll notice that if Destiny is arguing with someone other than me, he'll say, Venezuela's all starving because of socialism. But then when he's arguing with me, he realizes I know that's false and I can debunk that. So he pivots to, well, their problem started, that's how this stuff works. All right. Humanitarian aid, smuggling weapons, that's absolutely true, right? Many instances of U.S. humanitarian aid has involved the smuggling of weapons and all of that. And when Venezuela said that, they said, many times U.S. aid is used to smuggle weapons and such. U.S. media did their, oh, wow, that's crazy. And it's not crazy. Look throughout the history. Many times U.S. aid is actually covert, weapons and stuff like that. But of course, this is how, you don't actually believe that, do you? Everybody knows the USA never. This is, like I said in the opening, right? This is how they work. This is how they roll. All right. Humility is a virtue. Absolutely. I think humility is a good thing, right? I admit my mistakes. When I make mistakes, I admit them, right? And being able to admit your mistakes is a good thing. Being able to realize that you are fallible is a good thing. Not having an overblown image of yourself, not believing that you are capable, of things you are not capable of. Sure, I think that's a great thing, Chaya. All right, best books on the fall of the Soviet Union. Socialism Betrayed by Roger Kieran, Perestroika by Harpal Brar, Europe Since 1989 by Philip Thayer, The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. There are many, many good books on that topic. All right. How can China guard against contamination? Well, the main thing is to focus on their own ideas and not let Western Marxism affect their Marxism. Realize that the Marxism of China is very, very, very different than the Marxism of Vosch, right? And not let Western Marxists, China, restrictive immigration laws, not realize that that their Marxism is very different than the Marxism of people like Bosch, and preserve their own Marxism, their own tradition, and not let Western voices of Marxism dominate Marxist discourse. I think that's very important because Marxism coming out of the West is contaminated. All right. How do you get the energy to read books? Well, look, some people read and some people don't. I think it's a tragedy in our society that people are not very literate, but I don't pass moral judgment on that. I had a very hard time learning to read. Now, I did finally learn to read, but when I was learning to read, I had a really hard time doing it. Very hard time doing it, because the way we teach kids to read in the United States isn't very effective. I did finally learn to read, and then I was reading, very well when I was a youngster. But the way we teach children to read is not good. And a lot of adults, most adults, I would say in the United States, not most, but a very big percentage of adults in the United States are what I would call functioning illiterate. They can read, right? If I held this book up in front of them, they would know it said, "We are city builders." But reading paragraphs, reading whole essays and articles, not so much, right? And that's the reality. A lot of adults in the United States, while they are literate technically, they are not illiterate. They have not learned like full-on reading comprehension, right? And that is there's a difference, right? They teach kids to read, and then they teach them reading comprehension, and that's another level. And a lot of adults in the United States do not have reading comprehension. And it's deeply tragic. I mean, our education in the United States is a disaster. It is a national embarrassment, our education system. And as a result of that, many people in the United States really struggle to read. I don't. I'm a very literary person. I'm writing, but, that's the reality. And I know a lot of people that, you give them a book, and, I mean, it's just not something that they do. And this isn't something we should laugh about. This is something we should be very, very, very angry about. We should be very angry about, right? As a country, we should be furious about this, right? This is how, this is how U.S. leaders have screwed over the population. Books, you learn a lot more from books than you do from television. Let me just tell you that much. All right. And for some people, reading requires a great deal of energy and concentration. For other people, it's just relaxing. For me, I relax, and I find reading nonfiction books to be very chill. But for some people who have gotten this shitty American education, reading books is a very stressful experience, and it's like giving them a book is like giving them a huge pill to shove down their throat, or telling them you're going to pull their teeth out, right? And it's sad. It breaks my heart to see this. This is American education. All right. Is Western media trustworthy on domestic issues? Question everything. Question everything, right? Don't assume it's true just because mainstream media says it, right? Some sources are obviously more credible than others, but question everything. Make your own decision, right? Think for yourself. All right. Why does China have restrictive immigration laws? I don't know. I mean, I haven't asked them. Right? I don't set Chinese immigration policy. I really don't. I can assume that they have some security risks, with everything going on with the Uyghur separatists and the Tibet separatists and the USA and the Hong Kong protests. But at the end of the day, I don't know what drives Chinese immigration laws. They don't ask me before they pass their immigration laws, and I've never been to China or tried to educate China on these issues. So, become educated about it. So maybe you should ask folks in China about that. All right, any other super chat questions before we go? Anything before we sign off here? Anything else, folks? Folks, like I said, if you want to be part of the patrons-only stream, the small, intimate patrons-only stream, it's happening on Thursday. Be sure to sign up below. Best books on Soviet economics. That's a good one, Soviet economics. And if you want to be part of the patrons-only stream, I recommend you do that. And don't forget to get your copy of We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual. Very important book. I recommend you read it. Yeah, folks, anything else? Soviet economics, super chats, anything like that. How accurate are Foster's descriptions of the Soviet Union at the end of his books? Okay. TSA and Twilight. Okay. All right. So as far as books on Soviet economics, Maurice Daub has a very good book called Soviet Economy Since 1917. I've quoted that book many times. There's also there's a good book on a metal factory in the Soviet Union that I read, and I learned a lot from that. There's also a very good book called Soviet Communism, A New Civilization by Sidney and Beatrice Webb. I recommend that. The Dean of Canterbury, the Red Dean of Canterbury, who was I believe he wrote, some very good stuff on it. Anna Louise Strong wrote beautiful stuff about the Soviet Union. There's a lot out there, right, on the Soviet economy. So, I would recommend, they would publish their 5-year plan. They had their magazine, and, they would publish their 5-year plan every year, for goodness sakes. If you want raw economic data, you can get that from the United Nations. You can get that from the CIA World Fact Book. You can get that from the state, the Library of Congress. Country Studies has a lot of good information, just raw economic data. I often quote from them. But in terms of actual books, there's many things that have been written, so there you go. Toward Soviet America and Twilight of World Capitalism. Toward Soviet America, right, that's William Z. Foster's book that he wrote for the 1932 presidential campaign. In that book, chapter 2 is about the rise of socialism, and it's very accurate. It describes the 5-year plans, in the Soviet Union and how they were industrializing, and it quotes from a lot of mainstream U.S. media sources about, the achievements. So, that's, towards Soviet America, chapter 1 is about the Great Depression and its causes. Chapter 2 is the rise of socialism, the Soviet Union's achievements. Chapter 3 is, the crisis politically in the United States, and it talks about social fascism, and all of that. And then, chapter 4, the revolutionary way out, talks about the Communist Party's vision of organizing for the workers and all of that. And chapter 5 is the vision of a Soviet America. And Towards Soviet America is very clear, very coherent, very to the point. I recommend that book. It's very, very good. It's a little bit, the social fascism line is a little bit much, and his vision of the Soviet America is a little bit more authoritarian. I think that, it's a little bit, I think because it was the Great Depression, people were very much in an authoritarian mode, but overall, it's a very good book. It's probably the book that most, won me to communism. When I read William Z. Foster's Toward Soviet America when I was 15, I was like, yes, I agreed with that book. I was all about it. I loved that book. Twilight of World Capitalism is William Z. Foster's book after World War II, during the beginning of the McCarthy period. He wrote a very good book called The Twilight of World Capitalism. It's a very good book, and it lays out the role of the Soviet Union in the anti-fascist war, socialism in the 20th, right, socialism, 20th century, in the anti-fascist war. He talks about McCarthyism, what's behind it. He talks about the role of the Catholic Church. He talks about Eastern Europe and everything going on there. I will say that book says the Soviet Union is in the early stages of communism. In the final sections of that book, he says that the Soviet Union is in the early stages of communism. I don't agree with that. And that was, again, that's what I point to as the biggest mistake and the biggest problem from socialism in the 20th century, was this notion that you could build a classless, egalitarian world without vast material abundance, right? And Deng Xiaoping corrected that. But, Stalin, in the final years of his life, was saying that the Soviet Union could have full communism, was entering the early stages of communism. That wasn't correct. Mao tried to build full communism in China with the Cultural Revolution. That was not correct. Che Guevara and his concept of the new socialist man. The basis of an egalitarian society, the basis of breaking down inequality, is material abundance. Right? You need material incentives to build a socialist society. There's going to be inequality in socialism. That the basis for achieving communism is vast material abundance. Right? And this is basic Marxism. If you read the Critique of the Goethe Program by Karl Marx, he makes this abundantly clear. The basis for achieving full communism is growth and abundance. That, not to share with my coworkers how much I made, I had negotiated higher. Okay, I don't know why you're telling me that, Texan. Your life, your job, your business. There you go. Yeah, and that is a mistake, and that mistake that curse hung over the communist movement. This belief that you could build full communism, and Pol Pot is the worst example. And, look, Deng Xiaoping rectified that error. And now the socialist countries of the world understand that was wrong. You cannot build a society of equality without abundance, right? Inequality is rooted in scarcity. It's not rooted in the lack of communist ideology, right? That you can't ideologically force people to be equal. It doesn't work that way, right? And that you cannot transition to a higher stage in poverty, as the Gang of Four put it. But, I think Twilight of World Capitalism by William Z. Foster is a great book. Twilight of World Capitalism, because he talks about his theory of the people's democracy and the anti-monopoly government. And he puts forward his vision of how the Communist Party could come to power in the United States. And it's very, very important. So there you go. All right, and socialism in the 20th century, sources about it. W.E.B. Du Bois, the famed African-American intellectual, his autobiography has a whole section just raving about communism and China and the Soviet Union. I quote from it all the time. That's a great source. What other sources are there? My goodness. There's a lot. There's a great book. I believe he was one of the most important education scholars in the United States. His name is escaping me. Who is he? He wrote The Shame of a Nation. He's a leading critic of the American educational system. what was his name? I cannot remember his name for the life of me. Well, he wrote a book called Children of the Revolution. Children of the Revolution, it was called, and it was about the achievements of the Cuban, system in terms of education. It's a great book. And I mean, that's a great book. Right? What else? I mean, what other sources are there? Jonathan Kozol, that's his name. And he wrote a great book about the Cuban educational system. I mean, there are many little examples like this. There was Lamont, right? What was his name? Right? Lamont. He was an intellectual in New York in the 1950s. Right? Corliss Lamont. You can read Corliss Lamont. He wrote glowingly about the achievements of the Soviet Union. There's also a very good journalist, Wilfrid Burchett. Wilfrid Burchett, who wrote about the Korean War. He wrote about the Vietnam War from a pro-Soviet Marxist perspective. The journalist Wilfrid Burchett. He was great. He was really amazing. Great stuff that he wrote. John Pilger, the filmmaker, he has a lot of really good films. Why is the sun shining on me through the window and making my face look redder than ever? I mean, this is crazy. Maybe I can change the angle here. Does that make a difference? Or, all right, I move back. Or no. The sun is reflecting off that building. This is really neat. Okay, so the sun is reflecting off of this building here, right? See that? And it's shining on my face, and I'm looking redder than ever. Isn't that wild? That is wild. So here we go. For a while, it was just perfect. It was kind of neat, but now it's really kind of an overkill. That's how these things work. When you're asking me for pro-Soviet sources, pro-communist writers, John Pilger made some great films. He made great films. He went to Zimbabwe and interviewed Robert Mugabe during the Rhodesian Bush War. Wow. I mean, who else? John Pilger. Who else? Wilfrid Burchett, Anna Louise Strong, Edgar Snow. He's great. Edgar Snow, he wrote Red Star Over China. He wrote The Other Side of the River about China in the 1950s. He wrote The Long Revolution. That's great. A great writer, great journalist, Edgar Snow. Who else? There's a number of books about the experience of socialism in the 20th century. Many, many books that have been written that are positive and sympathetic. So yeah, I'm just naming them off here as we go. I've got stacks and stacks of them in my apartment. If I was at home, I would just turn to my bookshelf and start reading off names to you. So there you go. But there you go. Yeah, who's really good in writing about North Korea is Bruce Cummings, Dr. Bruce Cummings. He wrote a book called North Korea, Another Country, which is very, very good. Korea's Place in the Sun. That's another book, Bruce Cummings. Martin Hart Landsberg. I don't know if you know the name Martin Hart Landsberg. He's written about North Korea a lot. He writes very good writing about North Korea. Good stuff. Martin Hart Landsberg. Pretty good. There you go. Michael Parenti, I recommend anything that he wrote. Black Shirts and Reds is a very good book. It's got a lot of information about the devastation after the fall of the Soviet Union, as well as the aspects of the Soviet state and of fascism. That's very, very good. There's another writer that often gets forgotten. I'm trying to think of his name. He wrote Human Rights in the Soviet Union, and he wrote a lot of books about imperialism that are very good. What is his name? He wrote The Red Flag is Still Flying. Very good writer. He was a college professor, an academic Marxist. What is his name? His name is escaping me. Oh, Jesus. What is his name? Human Rights in the Soviet Union. And Red Flag is Still Flying. And he wrote a very big book about imperialism and the economics of imperialism. What is his name? It is escaping me, his name. He wrote a lot of very good stuff. What is his name? It's escaping me. It was, Szymanski, says Joe the Red. Albert Szymanski. He's amazing. Thank you. Albert Szymanski. Very, very good writer. I learned a lot from Albert Szymanski's writings. Really like Albert Szymanski. Wow, you're asking me to name off books, and there you go. Albert Szymanski, Edgar Snow, Anna Louise Strong, Wilfrid Burchett, Wow. Oh, you know who's good in writing about the Chinese Revolution? All right, Mugabe. We'll talk about that. Writing about the Chinese Revolution, I would recommend Agnes Smedley. She wrote amazing memoirs of the Chinese Revolution. Amazing memoirs. She was embedded with the Red Army, and this was this famous American feminist who had fought for India's independence and been imprisoned for it, and then eventually went to China, and she wrote amazing stories of the Chinese Revolution. That's some amazing stuff. Yeah. I mean, there's two great biographies of Mao that were written. There's a two-part biography of Mao written by Han Suyin. She wrote Love is a Many Splendid Thing, and she wrote two biographies of Mao, the Morning Deluge and Wind in the Tower. Those are both very good. All right, Robert Mugabe. Well, Robert Mugabe defeated the apartheid state of Rhodesia. He was leader of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU. He got the pro-Chinese and the pro-Soviet communists of Zimbabwe to unite into ZANU-PF, the Zimbabwe African National Union Popular Front. He waged an uprising of the people, the Rhodesian Bush War. White supremacists from all over the world formed Friends of Rhodesia and sent volunteers to fight against Mugabe, and they lost. One of the people who volunteered to fight Mugabe and was aligned with Friends of Rhodesia was the guy who killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. James Earl Ray. He was a member of the Friends of Rhodesia Club. He was very, very opposed to Robert Mugabe. And Robert Mugabe, they won the Rhodesian Bush War. They defeated the British Empire. They defeated the apartheid government of Rhodesia. They established Zimbabwe, and they signed the Lancaster House Agreement, which said they would not change property relations. Very important, not change property relations until like 15 years after the treaty was signed. So they didn't, right? They didn't redistribute land. They didn't, the white farmers still owned the majority of the land. But then in the 90s, they started moving ahead. That was the agreement. And they started redistributing the land. And immediately we heard about white genocide. And, the British recently gave up coke, socialist view of drug use. All right. Drug use. It was, they redistributed the land, and, he was very popular. Robert Mugabe was very popular. ZANU-PF, and they eventually nationalized the diamond mines. And I got to meet with some, comrades from Zimbabwe when I was in Russia. They talked about how important it is. China has built, a hotel near Victoria Falls, and that's been a very big. Zimbabwe is a deeply poor country. These are deeply impoverished African folks, and, redistributing the land and nationalizing the diamond mines and working with China. They have the Chinese currency as their currency now. They've had some steps forward. ZANU-PF is still in power, and there you go. All right, drug use. Socialists are opposed to drug use. Right? I mean, while I favor decriminalization, no one should be jailed for using marijuana. It's a personal choice. Ultimately, drugs are a tool of the capitalists to brainwash us, to control us, to make us addicts, to make us weak. Yeah, drugs are not good. Drugs are not good. I am not in favor of using drugs. I don't even drink alcohol at this point. I'm not opposed to it. If you want to drink alcohol, it's your business. If you want to smoke weed, it's your business. Other drugs, cocaine, heroin, and stuff like that is very, 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 very bad. Making you an addict is ultimately, what addiction does is it makes you a weak person. And you can't be weak and win a revolution. It's about making you dependent, making you a weak person, right? It's weakening your ability to control yourself. Addiction is a big, big problem. And that's why, socialist countries tend to be very, very harsh in restricting drug use. Now, I don't put marijuana, cigarettes, alcohol in the same category. But, heroin, cocaine, morphine, this stuff is how the capitalists control us, right? It's mind control, it's destructive, it's poisonous, and opioids. I'm against all of that. I'm against all of it. So on that note, folks, I'm going to end this afternoon stream. I'm glad you tuned in. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.